Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I recently did a video which was a top 10 of my favorite literary fiction because I think that a lot of people connect me and my channel with the genre of literary fiction. Some people commented that another genre or another kind of books that they connect my channel to is classics. So I thought that was a great idea, and I believe they're right because I do read a lot of classics, more towards autumn and winter than in the summer, but I still love a classic now and then. So I've come up with 10 classics that I consider my absolute favorite, and I have put them in chronological order, in contrast to the other video I did about literary fiction, which I didn't put in order, I think. But this time I believe I have managed to do just that. So let me start with place number 10, the least of my favorite classics, and that has to go to Mariana by Monica Dickens. Monica Dickens is the niece of Charles Dickens. I'm not the hugest fan of Charles Dickens, but Monica Dickens, that's a whole other story. This book surprised me. It was beautiful. It's a coming-of-age story about this young girl and her childhood and how she grows up and establishes these friendships. It's about her experiences as a child, and I can't really tell you what else it's about because when I read it, I devoured it. I was enraptured in this beautiful world, and once I finished it, I was like, what was it really about? But it is a really beautiful story, and as I said, I was surprised. I've since then read another book of Monica Dickens and loved it almost equally as much, and that was The Winds of Heaven, but this one has to be my favorite of the two I've read of hers. At number 9, I have Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. I think this is my favorite book of Jane Austen's, even though it's hard to choose, but I like this because it's Victorian and it is macabre. We are set in a castle and everything is very mysterious. The main character is told that she might hear some disturbing noises during the night, but not to worry. Once again, this is a book about a female protagonist, and it's a coming-of-age story about her being sent to some friends to spend some time. Something like that. I must admit, it's been a few years since I read this, but what I remember is that I was amazed at how much it touched me and how fond I was of this setting, this gothic setting. I loved it a lot, and it's one of the smaller classics out there, so if you want to get your nose dived into the world of classics, then maybe this is the way to go. However, the next classic is one I remember fondly because it's one I've read several times, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is a book that plays with the macabre. It's about our main character called Dorian Gray, who is a young man and who one day finds himself with an artist. The artist agrees to paint his portrait. This portrait turns out to affect Dorian Gray in some way. I'm not going to spoil it and tell you how that is, but as I said, it's a macabre story. It's another Victorian, I believe, and it's definitely gothic. I love my gothic tales, and this one is definitely one of my favorites. At number 7, I have a book which is less macabre, and that is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. This one is just a very feel-good book about Cassandra, our main character, and her family who are living in this castle. It's a coming-of-age story. We follow Cassandra as she writes in her diary and tells us about her everyday life and her siblings and her father and everything that's going on in and around this castle. It's a book that I read over Christmas, and I believe it's the best time of the year to read it because it has this wintry atmosphere to it, although it also does take place a little bit in the spring and in the summer. It was a book that made me feel happy and good, and I loved it for that, so definitely a book I had to have on this list. I believe this is also more of a children's fiction, so it was pretty easy to read and it was just a beautiful story. I also made a dent in my book because I had to do a thumbnail and I dropped all of the books and I hate myself now, but nevertheless, here we have this book at number 7. At number 6, I have a dystopian, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. I'm sure you know of this book. This is the novel that inspired Big Brother, the phenomenon of Big Brother. It is about this society in which you are observed at all times. No matter where you go, no matter where you live, and no matter who you talk to, you are observed, and everything you do and say can be held against you. So you have to be very careful, and you have to respect the laws of Big Brother, who is the power of this society, you could say. This is a book that makes you feel very claustrophobic while reading, and it also makes you wonder about the parallels between this book and our world today, in which we have so many ways to observe each other, and we have to be careful when we are in public. When we go out, there will be cameras everywhere. We have our social media. Whenever we go to a job interview, the people at the interview are able to find information about you online. So it's a book that scares you because it was written in 1948, but nevertheless, it plays with a lot of things that are actually happening in our society today. At number 5, I decided to go for Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, which is another classic I have read several times. This is a love story about an affair. Our main character is married, but she falls in love with another man, and this is about that experience of hers, which is very hard to get through and to live with, because she lives in an age in Russia in which affairs are obviously forbidden and looked down upon. She risks losing her social life and her husband, obviously, so she is in a dilemma, but she just can't help falling in love with this man. It's a very heartbreaking story. It's a story that is very big. There are a lot of pages to this one, but whenever I read it, I feel like I fly through it in a matter of days, because it's well written. It's a love story that captivates you, and it's just beautiful from beginning till end. So it had to be on my list. I consider it one of my absolute favorite classics of all time, and also this edition is absolutely stunning, don't you think? Spot number 4, I have obviously Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which is just such a beautiful story. This is another coming-of-age story about Jane Eyre, whom we meet when she is a child. Her parents are dead, and in the beginning of the book she is placed with some relatives who do not treat her very well. These relatives also come with 2 children who basically terrorize our poor Jane. The story takes out from that experience. And as I said, it's a coming-of-age story, so we do get to follow Jane from she's a child until she is in her late 20s. She goes through so many things during these decades. All I can tell you is that this is also a love story, and it's a heartbreaking book that comes with surprises. I have also read this one several times, and every time I read it, I rediscover my love for it, and it just had to be on this list. I actually thought it was going to be at the top of my list, but there are some other books that I had to put there, but this is definitely up there. I have now made it to the top 3 of my favorite classics, and at number 3 I have The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. This is a book that I read pretty recently, and I haven't reread it yet, but I'm looking forward to doing just that. This is a book about a family who lives in Oklahoma. They live on this farm, and they are doing just fine until the Great Depression of the 1930s America. This depression forces them to leave their farm and go seek jobs and a better life in California. And the only way to go to California is to go by a truck they have. So they have to carry everything they own with them on this truck. Needless to say, this is going to be quite a difficult journey, both mentally but also physically. This is a book that will definitely break your heart. It's definitely not for the faint-hearted. The ending is one of the best fictional endings I've ever read. I was surprised, I was shocked, but I also felt like that ending played really well with the rest of the story and the message as well. At number 2, I have another book by John Steinbeck, because he just writes such amazing fiction, and that is East of Eden. Now this one is also set in America, but I believe this is my favorite of his, just because this one plays with a lot of my favorite fictional characters of all time. For instance, we have Kathy, who is a whore, and she is the meanest character you will ever encounter, at least in a classic, I believe. We also have a set of twins who are adorable to read about. We get to know them as they grow up with their father and a servant whom they consider their uncle in America. And this uncle is also one of my favorites. He is knowledgeable, he is intelligent, and he brings a lot from his old culture with him that he shares with these twins. I haven't even touched upon the plot of this book, but I think it's one that you have to experience for yourselves. I will say that this is a novel divided in two. The first part of the book, we get familiar with Kathy and the father, and then it's not until the second half of the book that we encounter the twins. But I love this to pieces. I've read it twice. I've loved it deeply both times, and I can't wait to read it a third time, hopefully pretty soon. Now, if you know me and if you have followed my channel regularly, I think you know what the book at the top of my list is. If not, that's perfectly okay, but I think a lot of you out there know what it is. I am obviously talking about The Catcher in the Rye by Jd Sal. I cannot explain to you how much I love this book. This is a book set in December over Christmas in New York City. It's a book of rebellious Holden Caulfield who keeps getting kicked out of colleges and schools. So he finds himself alone in New York City over some days in Christmas, and he decides to not tell his parents that he's actually all alone because he wants to take some time off for himself and I think a little bit about what is happening and how he dislikes everything and everyone. He's a very pessimistic character who finds everyone to be phony. He is not very agreeable company, that's for sure, and a lot of people don't like this book for that reason, but I loved it for that reason amongst others. I find Holden Caulfield to be a very typical teenager, and I find that the way we are inside his head and the way we experience what he thinks and how he sees the world is pretty accurate when it comes to a teenage boy. Not that I would know, I've never been a teenage boy myself, but I love the tone of voice in this book. I also love the setting of New York City during Christmas, and I love how this book comes with a message that is pretty unbelievable, but nevertheless it's a message, and I appreciate that. So beware, this is at the top of my list, but it's a book that splits the waters, and even though I love it to pieces, you might not like it at all, and that's perfectly fine. As long as you don't tell me, I'm fine with that. And that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed my top 10 classics. Have a great day everyone, and until my next video, happy reading.